Welcome in, everyone. It is late Tuesday evening, and I am sitting here having a cup of coffee, decaf that is, because I would not be able to sleep if it was caffeinated. But just wrapped up my most of my research for the 3-game EPL slate tomorrow. So that is what I'm going to cover in this video. Quickly, if you're new here, or if you've come back for a few videos and have not subscribed yet, please go ahead and do that now. I appreciate it. It lets me know that you are finding the content helpful. And then that way you get a notification as soon as a new video comes out, which I have been putting out on a daily basis here now since we just have a ton of soccer. And of course, shout out to everyone that has subscribed thus far and who has been commenting and giving me feedback. That is much appreciated. So thank you again. All right, let's talk about this slate. So we've had a bunch of showdowns here, and while we finally have a 3-game slate, I think it's largely going to come down to how we handle one match, and that, of course, is the Manchester City Newcastle game. So as you'll see here, I've got the odds pulled up on Bovada. Manchester City, a massive favorite, minus 950. They are favored by 2.5 goals here. We don't often see lines like this in the EPL, so the odds makers really think that City are going to come out here and just crush Newcastle. More on that in a moment, but let me just touch on the other two games. We've got Sheffield and Wolverhampton. Pretty big matchup here because both teams are still holding on to hope of qualifying for either the Champions League or the Europa League. That's much more realistic for Wolves, but Sheffield are technically still in the mix, mathematically speaking. The total in that game only a 2. And again, that's something I'll touch on again in a minute. And then we also have West Ham Burnley. West Ham a minus 105 favorite here. A little bit surprising there because Burnley have been better over the course of the season, sit quite a bit higher in the table. They're basically safe in the mid-table. They're actually like on level points with Arsenal and Tottenham essentially, so that kind of tells you how they've done this season. Of course, I guess that says more about how poorly Tottenham and Arsenal have done this season, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, West Ham at home there, half a goal favorite, minus 105. So let's take it match by match, and we got to start with the Manchester City match because, how you handle that match is going to, I think, largely dictate how you build for this slate and how you end up doing. So, I think a little context is appropriate here because Manchester City have been a bit erratic since the restart. They come out, they beat Burnley 5-0. They beat Liverpool 4-0. But then they have a game where they lose to Chelsea. Okay, but then they lose to Southampton last time out. So they're a bit all over the map here. They're pretty much locked into their spot in the league. They do have the Champions League to worry about, so they don't want to burn everybody out. Then you have Newcastle, who, believe it or not, are undefeated since the restart in 5 matches. And so they've actually looked decent here. A team that's had a really poor defense over the course of the year, but have looked fairly solid recently. So I think, you could make an argument that City could struggle a bit here or be caught off guard by a Newcastle team that has honestly looked pretty good. However, the line we're getting here, minus 950, indicates otherwise. That tells me that the odds makers think that this is a match where Pep is going to put out a really strong lineup, and City are probably pissed off that they just lost that game 1-0 to Southampton. So they're going to try to come out here at home and make a statement, like they did against Burnley when they won 5-0. So I think on the whole, I tend to agree with the odds makers here that City should come out here and just crush Newcastle. But I think certainly in tournaments, you could kind of follow that narrative that City struggle and Newcastle makes life difficult. That will give you some leverage over some highly owned City guys. So let's talk about the lineup here. This is the projected lineup. Couple interesting things. Well, not really interesting is that De Bruyne's going to return to the starting 11. He's going to be the optimal play from City. He's essentially matchup proof because if City have a game where they score a bunch of goals, it's very, very likely that he's going to be involved somehow, some way, whether it's a goal or an assist. But if you have a game where Newcastle defend really well and City struggle to score, then De Bruyne's still going to have a great game because he's going to put in a ton of crosses, create a bunch of chances, shoot from distance. So he's going to get his either way. So that's what makes him the safest play on the slate. And since he did not start last match, I fully expect that he goes the full 90 minutes here. So outside of that, I think a lot of things are up in the air. So this projected lineup has Raheem Sterling moving into the central forward role, pushing Jesus out, Mahrez on one wing, and then Foden up here in the left wing. So Foden sometimes plays back in the midfield. He has played up here in an attacking position as the left forward. So if he is up there in attack, he becomes really interesting. He's been in really good form, a few goals over his last few matches. Sterling, I definitely prefer in this wing position because he could get a bit isolated here. If Sterling's on the wing, I love him. I like him a little bit less if he's playing centrally here. David Silva is a guy that always goes overlooked for City, so a nice option in tournaments, particularly given that he's one of the lower priced, or perhaps the lowest priced City attacking option. Speaking of low price City attacking options, if Bernardo Silva does start, I really like him at his price point. He looked to be one of the more lively guys in that Southampton game where City were struggling. But he did play the full 90 minutes, and Pep does not often play him in back-to-back matches, so I'm not sure that he's going to start. Mahrez is always going to be a good play because he's a guy that combines floor and upside, almost to the extent that De Bruyne does. The problem I have with Mahrez is that in 3 of his 4 starts, he's gone 65 minutes or less. So that's really concerning when you're paying $10,000 for a guy. All right, Newcastle. I mean, there's not really a lot to say here. Based on the way these guys are priced, at least on DraftKings, I have not looked at FanDuel. I just can't. Maybe you get Richie in there taking all the set pieces or half of them in an attacking position, but I just don't think Newcastle win many set pieces. Even if City struggle to score in this game, they play good defense because they just possess the ball, so it just does not give their opponents many chances to do anything offensively. So I just really can't see an argument for playing any Newcastle guys. Maybe Dwight Gale's been in actually really good form, and he could be one of the cheaper starting forwards. So if you really want to go off the board in a GPP build, maybe you throw Gale in there, but that's the only thing I'd be looking at. Let me now. We'll just go to this Sheffield and Wolves game. So it's got the lowest total too. Just be aware of that. Both of these teams, their style of play is kind of to play it rather safe and organized. They would rather concede possession at times and then counter. They're not going to, send a bunch of guys forward and get caught out. That's just kind of how both of these teams have succeeded all season. You add that to the fact that both of these teams still have plenty on the line here. So I think it turns out to be a really cagey affair where, it could be one of those matches where you're just watching it and it's like both teams are just passing the ball around and you're rarely seeing a shot on goal. You're rarely seeing open play. So I just don't love this match from a DFS perspective. with that being said, there could be some plays here. I think with Wolves, you usually know what you're going to get. The only question is whether Traore starts, which would push Dendoncker out. Of late, it's been alternating every game. So Traore started last match, so I think he could come off the bench in this one. So this is probably the lineup you're going to see. Now, the thing with the Wolves guys, Raul Jimenez is 9,400. So you play him, and that means you're not playing Sterling or you're not playing Mahrez. And as great as Jimenez has been, are you going to play him over Raheem Sterling when Jimenez is on the road against Sheffield and Sterling is at home against Newcastle? I think that's a pretty easy decision. And even if Traore's in, he has a great floor, but is it that much higher than Sterling's that you're going to play Traore for his floor and you're going to fade Sterling's ceiling against Newcastle, which is a hat trick? So that's just what you need to think about with City. Now, if for whatever reason you think that Newcastle are playing well and City are erratic and maybe they just lay an egg, okay, then play Jimenez or play Traore. But I just think that that's more of a GPP thing to get leverage. I just don't see how that makes sense in an optimal build, but that is my take. Quickly to go to Sheffield because I pretty much want to avoid them, but John Fleck is still out, which means Osborne is probably going to start in central midfield again. He's only 3,100. He could be an important punt option on the slate given pricing. Actually, one thing I forgot to mention on City is that Rodri is only 3,600, which is honestly underpriced, even though he's a defensive midfielder. But anyway, Osborne is 3,100. He took 3 corners last match, but those all came when Norwood was subbed off the field. So if Norwood's on the field, he's going to take all the set pieces. At least that's the way it appears. Norwood is kind of like the João Moutinho of Wolves. He's going to take probably all the set pieces with Fleck out, and he's only 5K. That's on most slates. That's a really good floor play, but again, in the context of this slate where there's probably going to be a lot of goals, not sure that whatever Norwood gets you is going to cut it because the guy just rarely gets on the score sheet. And I didn't even mention João Moutinho, but it's kind of the same story with him. So, all right, finally, West Ham Burnley. So, as I mentioned, this one's a little weird just because Burnley have actually been pretty solid. I think they're unbeaten in the last 3. West Ham, they've just been inconsistent all season. They come out and beat Chelsea a few matches ago, and then they'll just come out and lay an egg against terrible teams. It's just, you don't know what you're going to get from them. So that's the first issue I have with them. But here's the thing. They are at home, and they're sitting just above the relegation zone. So this match is a lot more important to West Ham than it is to Burnley, who are safe at this point. So then, you have that issue of motivation for sure. The other thing with Burnley is they just have like an absolute joke of a bench right now because of injuries and contract disputes. It's like a U19 team on their bench. So you have to wonder when fatigue is going to start affecting Burnley, negatively. We haven't really seen it yet, but I think that's why we might see this line where it is. I just think that Burnley might end up with tired legs here, especially in the second half of this game. And for as bad as West Ham have been, on paper, they have a lot of talent on the bench in most games. So just something to think about there. On the West Ham side, this is the predicted lineup, 4-3-3. I think that's about right. Bowen and Antonio have both been really good over the last three. I think Bowen's been on the score sheet in 3 straight. Antonio scored in the last 2. So these guys are in pretty good form. Last match, Bowen took, I think, 4 out of the 5 West Ham corners, even with Cresswell in the field. And I think Lanzini was in too. So, not a guarantee, because West Ham is a team where that moves around, but Bowen, really good open play value. And then you add in some corners, which I think they'll have a good amount against Burnley. Very attractive play. And again, on most slates, I would really like Bowen. But I just think, I'm not sure if I could pull the trigger on him, because he is taking you off of a City forward. So again, it's just the opportunity cost that you need to weigh there. And same thing with Antonio. You're playing Antonio over Gabby Jesus, essentially. So, even though Jesus has not scored a goal in the last 4 or 5 matches, I think my money's still going to be on Jesus to score a goal over Antonio. Yes, Antonio has a higher floor, but again, how much higher is it, and does that even really matter on a slate where, the odds makers are telling us that there's going to be a lot of goals? So, all right, finally, Burnley. You're going to get the same lineup that you've seen the last 2 matches, because they simply don't have other options. Chris Wood was healthy enough to come off the bench last game, but I don't think he's going to start. And even if he does, he's 8K. And he's not going to be in form because he's missed 4 or 5 matches. And you got to tack that on to the 3-month layoff they had before that. So no interest in Chris Wood. Probably the one guy I will be looking at on Burnley is Eric Peters. He's a defender, 4K, but he's played the last 2 matches in an attacking position. So pretty good value there. 4K getting an attacker in a decent matchup against a West Ham team who definitely can see goals. For the same reason, I think Jay Rodriguez and Vidra are pretty good GPP options to get some leverage off of City if they pick up a goal. And again, would not be surprised to see West Ham collapse and let in a couple goals. So that's what I'm looking at there. Dwight McNeil is always a good play for Burnley, but he's up in that range again. He's 9,100. So am I going to play Dwight McNeil over Raheem Sterling? No. I'm not going to do that. But I mean, not in an optimal build. Sure, you want to do that in GPP to differentiate, go for it. You'll probably get really low ownership on McNeil. So, anything goes in GPP. If it's possible and you're going to get leverage from it, then go for it. But so that kind of brings us full circle just to, I think overall strategy here, I probably am going to load up on City. I just think it's like outthinking yourself or just overthinking it if you're thinking about all these pivots off of City. I mean, you've got 2 other matches that aren't that great on paper, and then you've got the second best team in the league, arguably the best team if you looked at expected goals, and they're playing one of the worst defenses in the EPL. So I think it's as simple as that. Don't overthink it, and also don't this is something I've done in the past for sure. Don't overthink which City pieces you're going to use. at the end of the day, none of them have great floors outside of De Bruyne. And so beyond that, it's just dealing with the variance of where do the goals and the assists come from. And that's why I often just lean towards just paying down and getting as many of them as possible because, who knows where the goals are going to come from. So, yeah, it's a city slate. So you know the drill. You're going to want exposure in your optimal build, and there will definitely be leverage in, maybe not completely fading City, but, just taking one piece, taking De Bruyne and then getting your forwards elsewhere or something along those lines. There will be plenty of leverage in that, especially if you're playing in the main GPP. So something to think about there. All right, that is going to wrap it up for me. Thank you again for tuning in. Hope you found it helpful. Would love to see a subscriber or someone who is here for the first time have a big payday on this slate tomorrow. As always, if you have any questions, just drop a comment below and I will try to get to them. Of course, if you want a quicker response about anything dealing with the slate, you can just find me on Twitter because I'll get notifications as opposed to here. I just intermittently check it. So again, thanks for watching. If you're new, please hit the subscribe button and I will see you next time. Good luck.